Assalamu alaikum and welcome to all of you. This discussion is about the beginning of English literary study in British India. It means that how English literature was introduced, why it was introduced, and what was the purpose of introducing that. So, first of all, if we consider what is literature, so you know that it's a very vast discussion. However, here we can keep ourselves to only one aspect, and that aspect is literature is language charged with meanings. Then, if we consider the historical perspective of English literature in the Indian subcontinent or in British India and colonized India, then we can classify the period into three perspectives. That is pre colonial literature, before the colonialism. Then the second was colonial literature, the literature which was created, which was introduced, which was made part of the curriculum in India during the colonial period, then that can be classified as colonial literature. And after the colonialism, at the end of the colonialism, then we can say that the impacts of colonialism that is studied under the heading of post-colonial literature, and usually post-colonial literature means the literature which is introduced, which is created by the colonized, and where we can discuss the impacts, the social impacts, the economic or financial aspects or impacts, then the cultural aspects, then the psychological aspects, and so on. So, first of all, why English literature was introduced. So, this discussion can be thoroughly covered in the books or the study of the books Mask of Conquest, Literary Study and British Rule in India by Gauri Vishwanathan. This is actually a discussion. This book is based on the exploitative strategies of the British Raj for their own interest. So, and the second book is Outside the Fold, Conversion, Modernity, and Belief. This is another book by Gauri Vishwanathan, and this can also be linked with this discussion. Then, for the broad spectrum, we can consider that Minute on Indian Education, which was advocated by Lord Thomas Macaulay in his historical speech or historical write up, Minute on Indian Education. So, the study of these books, these articles, and these debates, they can provide us a historical perspective. Now we will consider the slides, and these slides they can help us the historical background, the exploitative strategies, and the other motives which the British Raj, which the colonizers they had in mind during the colonial period. The beginnings of English literary study in British India. The English literary canons in India was an imperial tool. It means that the English literature was introduced as a tool, and that tool was for exploitation. A plan by which A collaborating class was brainwashed into accepting the cultural superiority of the Great Britain. It can be traced or judged through the concept of cultural hegemony, and you know that the cultural hegemony it was introduced by Antonio Gramsci. So, according to Gramsci, cultural hegemony is maintained through the consent of the dominated class. A dominated class can exercise its power not merely by the use of military force but by an institutionalized system of moral and intellectual leadership. A leadership that propagates certain ideas and beliefs. Now, as an introduction, let's take a quotation of one of the ministers of Tipu Sultan. The quotation is: "We are not afraid of what we do see of the British power, but of what we do not see." It means the hidden agenda of the colonial rule or the colonialism. It is actually identified in this quotation. The British administrator introduced English literary study in India to improve the moral knowledge of Indians. English literature came to Indian education through the Charter Act in 1813. This is very vital point, very important point, and you should keep that in mind that under the Act of 1813, a new education policy was introduced. To control and manage the education system of India, the analysis of the colonial discourse reveals the formulation of such educational policies. Now, through colonial discourse, the study of colonial discourse tells us actually these strategies, the hidden strategies. The Indians studied English literature using poetical devices such as rhyme, alliteration, and other devices just like metaphor and similes. However, that was only for the aesthetic sense. The missionary insisted upon religious study of English literature. So, not only aesthetic sense, but you know that there are two theories: art for arts and arts for literature. So, the missionary insisted that arts for life. That is, the missionaries insisted upon religious study of English literature. Thus, between 1830s and the 1850s, institutions in India used English literature to explain Christian teachings, the historical progress, and the moral standards of the English society. It means these disciplines were incorporated in the syllabus in the education policy of the Indian education system. But religious readings of English literature did not provide Indians with the proper knowledge to join the colonial administrative services. The task was to prepare the Indians for some administrative or other responsibilities as well. By the end of 1850s, British administrators changed their stance and advocated a secular reading of English literature to encourage commercial and trade literacy. After the 1857, and you know this was a historical moment in the history of British India or in the history of India, when the Indians when they revolted against the British. After the 1857 Indian Revolt, the British officials did not wish to adopt policies that might incite or that might instigate fears of conversion among Hindus and Muslims. And one of the causes of the War of Independence was the using of that cartridges. Then this was an introduction. Now, how we can trace the strategies, the hidden agenda of the British Raj. This was identified and exposed by Gauri Vishwanathan and her books Mask of Conquest and Outside the Fold, Conversion, Modernity and Belief. They actually identify such strategies of the British Raj. Mask of Conquest is about the introduction of English studies in Indian under the British Raj. The discipline of transcontinental movements, derivations, and origins of English studies. This is included in the book. Then, outside the fold is a radical examination of religious conversion. So, this book, Outside the Fold, is actually focused on the religious conversion of various communities. Then, how conversion questions the limitations of secular ideologies and the discourse of fundamental rights, the legal emancipation of religious minorities in England, and the acculturation of colonial subjects. Now, we will consider some key concepts. The curricular study of English can no longer be understood without imperial context. English study was introduced in India for political control and cultural assimilation. The text functioned as masks of exploitation and camouflaged the colonized British system. Education was used to emphasize British sovereignty in colonial India. The education system imposed by the British vividly influenced Indian canons. Colonizing governments gained strength through physical and mental control. Now, when they introduced the secular English literature, then they got this aspect of for the exploitation of the colonized. The mental control is implemented through the education system. Colonial education strips the colonized people away from their indigenous learning structures and draws them towards the structures of the colonizers or the British rulers or the colonizers as a whole. The point of Macaulay, a single shelf of good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. Now, this is actually colonial discourse. And the colonial discourse means how they consider the education system, the culture, the language, the financial system, the psychological approaches, the social systems, the other canons. So, this is a colonial discourse about it, and that on the basis of this point, which was introduced, which was advocated by Lord Macaulay, the secular education system was introduced in the colonized or British India. The target of the curriculum was to demonstrate the superiority of English culture and mask the economic exploitation of the colonized, to ensure the authority of the British government and to create a stable state. And definitely, the stable state can be organized, can be controlled with the help of military strength and then ideologies. And the ideology in this case, it was the British ideology or their system, their canons. Thus, English literature made its inroads in India gradually and imperceptibly, with a crucial event in Indian educational history through the passing of the Charter Act of 1813. So the last point or the concluding point is the curricular study of English can be understood with imperial context. The study of colonial discourse and context can lead to the formulation of educational policies. The relationship between power and culture and an indictment of the exploitative tendencies of ruling class and their interest can be traced through the study of the beginning of the cultural history of British India. Certain humanistic functions like character building, the act of developing aesthetics or ethical sense are associated with literature. The English study was introduced in India for political control and cultural assimilation. The text function as masks of exploitation and camouflaging the exploitative strategies. In the light of this brief introduction or discussion, we can conclude that the historical perspective can be classified as pre colonial literature, colonial literature, and then post colonial literature. And as I said in the beginning, that the colonial period, it tells us how the literature was introduced, was written just to keep the colonized in the control and to inculcate their own way of life, just like their tradition, culture, language, financial strategies, psychological strategies, etc. etc. So we hope that you might have a good idea from this slight introduction or this slight discussion. In the following lectures, we will focus on the detailed aspects of this historical perspective, and there we will discuss, we will take the exploitative strategies and we will expose them to the readers, to the audience, and to the research study as well. Thank you very much for your kind attention.